Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. My name is Karen Basson-Aquist, and I'm a professor of health disparities research and the director of the Center for Energy Balance and Cancer Prevention and Survivorship at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Today's webinar is hosted by the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the UT Health School of Public Health in Austin. The center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world. This webinar is part of the Digital Physical Activity and Diet Collaborative, or DPAD, which is a joint initiative of UT Health and MD Anderson Cancer Center, whose goal is to bring together researchers who are interested in addressing obesity, diet, and physical activity through technology-based research. Before we get started, I just wanted to make some housekeeping announcements. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived along with the presentation slides on our website at msdcenter.org. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into your questions chat box. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So finally, I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Maria Swartz. Dr. Swartz is a behavioral scientist by training, a licensed registered dietitian, and an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Her lab's overarching goal is to improve the quality of life of patients and survivors of cancer in children, adolescents, and young adults. Specifically, her research focuses on two aspects. The first is improving access to prehabilitation and rehabilitation services for cancer patients and survivors, especially children and adolescent and young adult cancer patients and survivors. The second is to examine the physical and cognitive benefits of physical activity in patients and survivors of childhood and AYA cancer. To optimize access and to improve delivery of physical activity interventions and to impact physical and cognitive functioning, her research is focused on developing scalable assessment methods, such as remote monitoring, to inform system-level intervention designs. For example, remote interventions to promote health behaviors and facilitate the delivery of preventive care to attenuate functional decline and cognitive impairment among at-risk individuals. I'm now happy to hand it over to Dr. Swartz so she can start her presentation on using digital tools to improve physical function in cancer patients and survivors. Dr. Swartz?
Thank you, Dr. Basson-Aquist and the DPAC committee for the invitation. Today, I will highlight a few of the digital tools that we are using in our lab to improve physical function and health-related quality of life in cancer patients and survivors. And before I dive into the details of the two studies I will highlight today, I will provide some background to provide some context as to the reason why my lab focuses on the physical function benefit of physical activity. So with the advancements in treatment, data from the 2022 Surveillance, Epidemiology, and End Results program show that there are currently 18.1 million cancer survivors living in the United States. And this number of cancer survivors is projected to increase to 22.5 and also 26.0 by 2040. And as you can see, the greatest increase are within the ages category of 65 to 85. However, the improvement in survival comes at a cost, and it is well established that cancer and cancer-related treatment are associated with a myriad of deleterious short and long-term side effects. This is a pictorial representation of a sheer number of short and long-term side effects that can negatively impact survivors' quality and quantity of life. And in regards to the symptoms, these are the 6 common symptoms that are experienced by cancer survivors during and after cancer, and their acronym is SPADE. And these include sleep disturbance, loss of physical function, pain, anxiety, depression, and energy deficit, or also known as fatigue. And specifically today, I will be focusing on the loss of physical function symptom. In the adult population, approximately 53% of cancer survivors reported functional limitations. And furthermore, in comparison to the reporting of the symptoms that you saw before from the SPACE symptoms, reporting of the activities of daily living related problems were less likely to be documented than pain or weight loss. And among the young adult childhood cancer survivors, a range of 36 to 88% reported symptoms associated with frailty phenotype expected of older adults, such as walking limitation and exhaustion. And furthermore, then not only do poor physical function severely impact patients and survivors' ability to tolerate cancer treatment, but the proximal consequences of poor functioning status is its interference with daily activities. And these activities fall within the activity and participation domain as depicted by the WHO's International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health framework, or the ICF framework. And these include engagement in personal care, achieve the education and vocational goals, engagement in normal activities for their age, such as sports participation or carrying a child, and reduce overall quality of life. And furthermore, the limitations mentioned before have been found to be associated with physiological frailty and can contribute to a cascade of functional decline that can increase healthcare utilization and increase early mortality risk, which is a more distal outcome. And this figure is a pictorial representation of two age-related functional trajectories and adapted from the aging researchers. The solid black line represents the projected normal aging trajectory. In contrast, the curve and dotted line shows how stressors such as cancer and cancer treatment and other personal factors can alter the projected aging trajectory. And such decline was found within a recent cohort study conducted by Feliciano and colleagues among 7,257 postmenopausal women who were enrolled in the Women's Health Initiative study. They found that the frailty before cancer diagnosis had an increased risk of mortality after diagnosis, and the rate of increase in physiological frailty over time was statistically significantly higher after cancer diagnosis. And similarly, using the Texas Cancer Registry and Medicare linkage data, we also found that cancer diagnosis itself was associated with the increased risk of developing disability status in a cohort of colorectal cancer survivors. And in a multivariable model, this is how we found this through our multivariable marginal Cox regression model after controlling for age, sex, race, ethnicity, income, and education and comorbidity status. And this figure shows that there are multiple risk factors that can contribute toward the loss of physical function and progression towards frailty. And today, I will be focusing on the physical inactivity component, which is a modifiable lifestyle risk factor. There's substantial evidence have been indicated that physical activity as a key strategy to mitigate physical function decline and improve quality of life. Additionally, it can also improve the previously mentioned BATE symptoms, except pain. And despite the known benefits of physical activity, overall, only 14.8% of cancer survivors aged 18 and older met the current federal guidelines for aerobic and also muscle strengthening physical activity. In comparison to the US adults, all age groups were lower. So for example, between the 18 to 44 group, the survivors were at 28.8% versus 29.7% for the US population. And then for the aged 45 to 64 group, the survivors were at 18.8% versus 19.9% of the US population. And then for the age 65 and plus, the survivors were at 12.75% versus 13.1%. And among cancer survivors, mostly commonly cited reasons associated with decline in activity level were fatigue, physical discomfort, and lack of belief in their ability to be active again. And then given that these challenges can impact how cancer survivors respond to physical activity interventions, reframing physical activity as pleasurable may promote more motivation for the adoption of physical activity and lead to more effective physical activity interventions. So on the topic of the lack of motivation, one of the theory related to the lack of motivation for physical activity, maybe that is related to the fact that our natural tendency is to conserve energy. And then also from the evolution perspective, humans have adopted to run only for a purpose, which is, for example, running from lions, tigers, and bears. And the other theory is for the lack of motivation is that maybe we go through this dual process and when deciding on whether or not to exercise. And then this is explained by the emerging dual process theory, the effective reflective theory of physical inactivity and exercise. So for this dual process theory, they focus on the affect and automaticity, which is how you're responding and how you're feeling about physical activity. And this is grounded in exercise physiology theory and explicitly connect to what we know about pleasant and unpleasant experience that we know that occur during exercise. And lastly, but not least, it offers a novel explanation of potential factors that influence lack of engagement in physical activity despite the known benefits. And accumulating evidence is suggesting that targeting a person's motivation and reframing the internal reaction to physical activity as a fun activity may lead to a more effective intervention. An exergame may be a potential gateway method to motivate physical activity adoption and then also improve physical function among cancer survivors. And some advantages of using exergames include that exergames include evidence-based behavioral change techniques and allow for low-cost and flexible physical activity intervention, and it encourages the moderate physical activity to lead to a better enjoyment to those activities. And then also physical activity duration showed an increased level despite the discomfort and intention to participate in the non-exergame physical activity. However, there is a gap in terms of use such a format and platform in delivering physical activity intervention. So we found that the use of exergames in combination with group-based behavioral-based physical activity intervention to improve physical function in breast cancer survivors has not been widely studied. So taking together the evidence in the literature, we have designed an exergame and group-based physical activity intervention to promote physical activity and physical function in survivors of breast cancer. So I just wanted to also point out, I had an N of 1. My grandfather, he was my N of 1 and my inspiration for the exergame intervention I'm about to share with you. He was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer in 2009. And during his, treatment and also even during hospice, he was gung-ho in becoming more physically active and then also maintain his ability to ambulate without assistance or minimally assist, even up until the 3 weeks before leaving this earth. So this is something that was really close to my heart, and then I see the benefit of the exergames on him. So I wanted to implement it within our breast cancer survivor population. So the primary aim of our in-person group and exergame-based physical activity interventions was to determine the feasibility and acceptability of a clinic-based multi-component physical activity intervention with a combination of extra game group play and then group physical activity intervention coaching, behavioral coaching, and then also breast cancer support. And then our secondary aim was to determine the effect size of the intervention on physical activity and physical function in female survivors of breast cancer. And this particularly, we want to point out that the physical activity behavioral coaching was adapted from the active living after breast cancer, which is a cognitive and behavioral skills training program to promote the adoption of physical activity and include a guided discussion on survivorship topic. And the behavioral coaching materials were developed based on the constructs of social cognitive theory and also self-determination theory. And we adapted the intervention based on the nursing staff, social worker, and also breast cancer survivors' feedback. And we shortened our session to 60 minutes. When you looked into Dr. Basinquist and also Dr. Tamari's study, that we shortened the session to 60 minutes to match our standard support group length. And the goal of the intervention was to encourage survivors to move more and sit less throughout the day. And then some activity is better than none. And that's our basically our messaging to our survivors. And then we used a randomized control trial design for our pilot study. And 60 participants were randomly assigned to the intervention group or the control group. The major inclusion criteria included ages 18 years and older at diagnosis and at enrollment, and it has a breast cancer diagnosis, the ability to read, write, and understand English, and obtain approval from oncologists to participate, did not meet the 150 minutes per week of physical activity guideline for aerobic exercise, and then also able to see a television screen from 2 to 4 feet. The intervention group received a game-based pedometer, as you can see from here, and received 12 weekly group-based extra game sessions, the physical activity behavioral coaching, and survivorship navigation discussions. And the extra game and game-based pedometers are our first example of the digital tools that we have used in our intervention. And then the control group received the conventional pedometers and participated in an existing breast cancer support group. Now, our primary outcome was the feasibility benchmark, which is the 50% of approach eligible patients with consent. And we use this approach to look at the feasibility benchmark because we had 3 cohorts of studies, participants enrollment, and then also we enrolled during the Harvey period. So we basically didn't look at participants enrollment by months, by time, just because we were enrolling them in different cohorts. And then also we had the benchmark for 80% retention rate was what we were trying to hit for feasibility. And then also 75% of participants attending at least 9 sessions in the intervention group. And the acceptability benchmark was the participants' attitude from strongly agree to strongly agree to strongly disagree. And then also the mean rating, when we see that the intervention is acceptable, is that we can see a mean rating of 4 and higher for all 11 questions. Now, as far as the secondary outcomes, the physical activity change is where our secondary outcome, as well as physical function, which is the short physical performance battery. This is an assessment of the lower extremity functioning, and then also the grip strength, which is an objective measure of the isometric muscular strength of hand and forearm. And both measures have been found to be associated with all-cause mortality risk in cancer survivors. And then as far as health-related quality of life, we use the FACT-B measure. And then this is a self-reported measure. And then for fatigue, we use the PROMIS fatigue. Again, this is also a self-reported measure. For those that you may not know what short physical performance batteries are, this is an example. This is showing you the details of what short physical performance battery is like. So first, you test the participant balance by doing the side-by-side, semi-tandem, and then also full tandem stance for 30 seconds, and then scores ranges from 0 to 4. And then for the time 3-meter walk, we basically looked at the fastest time of the 2-3-meter usual pace walk. And then also for the chair stand, they participants repeat 5 times of rising from a chair with arms folded across their chest or straight out, depending on their ability to cross the arm after the surgery. Then we use the students' t-test and chi-square test to evaluate baseline differences. And we use an analysis of covariance to determine the between group differences in physical function and physical activity metrics. And then also the analysis was completed according to the intent to treat principles with missing data imputed using regression models. The mean age of our participant was 57.4 years old, and 70% were non-Hispanic white, and 58% were off treatment. And we found feasibility within our study where we met the benchmark of the greater than equal to 50%, and then also the 80% retention rate, and greater than equal to 75% of participants who participated in the intervention group for at least 9 sessions. And as far as the acceptability, we found that our participants rated all components of the intervention, such as activities, and then also materials, and then also the extra game and group setting. So all components of our intervention to be 4 and higher. Here is our results from our pilot study that we found that we did achieve moderate effect size for our physical activity metrics, and then also some small effect size for our physical function metrics, and also quality of life, and then also fatigue. And here are some post-intervention feedback. Overall, the feedback were positive. The participants really enjoy, as you can see, that they really enjoyed the group meeting. And then also they felt supported. And then it motivated them to be more physically active and setting goals from learning from each other. Here's another, so these were actually feedback that were beyond the questionnaire we gave them. In fact, one of them actually hit the newspaper for this particular feedback. So our results demonstrated that extra game-based and group-based physical activity intervention was feasible and acceptable in a sample of middle-aged survivors of breast cancers who were on and off treatment. And then we found a moderate effect size for physical activity metrics. And then, in fact, with an increase of 1,000 steps a day, is associated with an decrease in all-cause mortality. And even though we found small effect size for the objective physical function outcome, they also reached a clinical important change in the intervention group for the gait speed. Similarly, we also found a minimal important difference for FATB and then also fatigue. So our findings suggest that our large-scale implementation of intervention has the potential to produce a small to moderate effect and also reach minimal important difference in physical activity, physical function, and quality of life metrics. The limitation of our works are that ultimately this is a pilot study with small sample size, so we can only look at the effect size, and then so we can also we can only test the full multi-component intervention, so we were not able to tease out the different components of the physical activity intervention. And also we do not know regarding the long-term maintenance of physical activity, behavior, and physical function. And then also our study was conducted within the southern eastern region of Texas, so the results may not be nationally generalized. So with the scalability in mind, we originally designed it in another study, and then also learning from our first intervention that some of our participants still experience access issue because of the cancer treatment. They were having a lot of side effects and that they were not able to drive to the clinic to participate in the physical activity intervention. So we have designed another study to deliver the same intervention to remotely in 20 female survivors of breast cancer. And this was conducted during the height of a pandemic. So we also tested the feasibility and acceptability of conducting effective performance outcome measures remotely. And that was not in our original plan. And so the primary aim of the remotely delivered intervention was to determine the feasibility of virtually delivering an extra game in group-based physical activity intervention in a sample of older survivors of breast cancer. And our secondary aim was to explore the potential influence of the intervention on physical function over 12 weeks. And then our design, similarly, we use an RCT design for our pilot study, and 20 participants were randomly assigned to the intervention group or the control group. The major inclusion criteria are similar to our Pink Warrior 1 study, except for this one, we limited to those 55 to 79 years old at diagnosis and also at recruitment. And unlike our in-person sessions, participants were not provided a game console to use in the group. And the extra games were live streamed via the secure video platform. And I have to say that we really liked using the secure video platform because not only does it offer a HIPAA compliant connection, but it also offers a way for us to schedule. And then the secure video platform is like, it's another platform that's on top of Zoom. And so it actually provided a way to have unique link for each of the participants. So we can actually, we did not experience any of those Zoom bombing that you have heard of during the height of pandemic. And then also we did not, and then the secure video feature also allowed appointment reminder for the participants. So they sent out reminder an hour before the session and also 15 minutes before the session. So you will see later on, our engagement is a lot better in terms of our retention rate. And then also the extra games were live streamed via the secure video platform, and a similar technique was in the research conducted by the Lin et al. That showed the live streaming of the extra games, and then they did not find any significant impact on participants' body movement and participation. And then so in our study, the facilitator stood in front of the game console and the selected games based on input from participants. And the facilitator's camera was aimed at the TV monitor and zoomed in on the avatar itself in the game, such as the yoga or kickboxing and Zumba. And the participants then follow the avatar trainer to complete the activity. And you may think, well, what's the difference between this and then also YouTube video? I would say that the difference is that the participants, as they were following the avatar, our facilitators are able to see how the participants are doing and provide feedback in terms of body placements, and then also even some of the adaptations are needed to be done in order to safely do the activities. And then the YouTube video with the games played during the sessions was also provided back to the participants to use throughout the week. And similarly to the previous design, both groups got activity trackers. So the intervention group got the physical Fitbit, and then also the control group received a Xiaomi band. And the reason why we chose Xiaomi band was that we found that in the Fitbit app itself, they have a lot more behavior change techniques built into the app versus the Xiaomi band. And all the other components are very similar to the previous studies that we discussed, except everything was delivered virtually. And for the control group, because the breast cancer survivorship group at the clinic did not automatically change into a virtual support group, we decided to basically match the exposure on a weekly basis. So our control group also received a weekly group-based phone call instead of video calls. And then also they received the same survivorship navigation discussion as our intervention group. And so for the primary outcome, similarly, we looked at our feasibility benchmarks and acceptability benchmarks. The feasibility benchmark, because this was recruited in one cohort, we used the participants per center per month recruitment rate as our benchmark, and then that is set at 0.92 based on several randomized controlled trials. And if you're interested in this paper, please let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. And then also similarly, we have the 80% retention rate as our benchmark and 75% of greater participants attending at least 10 sessions in the intervention group. And similarly, as the last study, the acceptability benchmark is set at 4 and greater for all 11 questions. The secondary outcome, this is slightly different from the first study just because of the type of assessments that we can do virtually. So for this one, we did for short physical performance battery, time up and go, and 2-minute step test. And then also we looked at physical activity changes such as average daily steps, and then also average minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And for those who don't know what time up and go tests look like, and also 2-minute step tests, these are pictorial representations of what it looks like. So for the time up and go, you have a measurement of 3-meter distance in a straight line. And the participants is to mark the end of one of the 3-meter, and they basically get time from the time that they stand up from the chair and walk around the marker, and then sitting down as how fast they can move. And this is a test of mobility. And then for the 2-minute step test, this is some of the tests of endurance, and where the participants are to be marching in place for 2 minutes and knee-high march up to that marker, as you can see. And for the statistical methods, we use the students' t-test and chi-square test to look at the differences at baseline. And then also we use the means and standard deviation to compute for the Cohen's d effect size. And the analysis was performed using the intent to treat principle as well, and use the last observation carry forward for one missing data. And then for our second cohort, second inquiry study, the mean age for this group is 63.7 years old, and 80% were non-Hispanic white, and 89% were off treatment. So we have a greater amount of participants who were in the off treatment category. And we did meet the feasibility benchmark in terms of meeting greater than 0.92 participants per center per month. And then also we had a high retention rate, which is 90%. And then 88% of our participants in the intervention group completed at least 10 intervention sessions. This was higher than our in-person session, which I talked about previously. We think that the secure video reminder system probably have helped in terms of engaging our survivors to come to our sessions. And then also we met the benchmark for the acceptability of our intervention. And for our physical activity and also function outcomes, we did see some small to moderate effect size and actually a large effect size for our physical function measure for SPPB. And then here are some of the post-intervention feedback. Similarly to the Pink Warrior 1 study, the Pink Warrior 2 participants also found the weekly meetings to be helpful. And also they liked the idea of hearing from other people on how they achieve their physical activity goals for the week. So that was a good way of learning from each other in the group dynamics. And then also they felt supported during their time going through the treatment, especially this person who was going through the treatment at the time. They really felt like they were supported by others who understood their diagnosis and side effects and how to overcome those kind of side effects to be more physically active. So overall, our results demonstrated that the remotely delivered exercise and group-based physical activity intervention was feasible and acceptable in a group of older survivors of breast cancer. And both the Pink Warrior 2 intervention and the attention control intervention group appear capable of reducing increase in physical function and physical activity. And both group increase in speed, the gait speed, by greater than 0.11 meters per second. And this is known to be a minimum significantly increase in terms of mortality associated with a decrease in mortality. And then also the intervention group did increase in their SPPB score by 1 point. And this is found also to be associated with a decrease in mortality. And then the intervention group participants started below the normative value for the 2-minute step test for 60 to 65-year-old range. But by the time of the end of the intervention, they actually met the minimal of the normative value range. And surprisingly, the improvement in our objective measures outcome for the intervention group were not matched by the group's average step count and moderate and vigorous physical activity. And the reasons why we think that may be a reason was that we did have 4 participants in our intervention group versus only 1 in the control group that experienced either SARS COVID-19 themselves, or their family members had contracted COVID-19, so they were in isolation together with their family members. And then also the use of actigraph. In the studies, they did find that the actigraph may not necessarily capture all of the steps accurately, is undercounting the steps for those who are having a lot of gait issues and potentially less functioning individuals. So those are our lessons learned for our larger studies that we are designing. So despite all the challenges, the overall findings led to the initial evidence that a virtually delivered multi-component physical activity intervention is feasible and acceptable to older survivors of breast cancer. And that contributed to the evidence that it is also possible to safely conduct objective mobility aerobic endurance and also functional fitness assessments using a video conferencing platform. And our exploratory findings indicated that potential physical function benefits is shown through our intervention in survivors of breast cancer. And similar to our first study, this pilot study is very small in sample size because of challenges in recruitment during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can only test the full multi-component intervention, and we can only say that it is initial evidence. And then also we do need to verify our finding in a larger pilot. And then also the last observation carrying forward, even though it has its limitation, we did only use it within one participant. And then again, it's also limited to the Texas region, so the results may not be nationally generalized. So based on our findings from our 2 pilot studies, we are currently adapting our intervention materials using the adoptum framework. As you can see from here, that we looked at the how the services, like the service setting, where we should be carrying out our intervention, and then also the target audience adaptation, thinking in terms of their preferences and their culture within the adolescent and young adult community, and then also the mode of delivery. Again, it's like how should we conduct this intervention in terms of delivering the intervention materials. As you can see, the first 2, the intervention materials were hard copy and printed and sent it to the participant, either given to the participants or sent it to participants. And then for the clinical the cultural adaptation, this is really truly based on how they want the survivorship navigation information to be delivered to them, and then also what type of information they want to see, and then also looking at the core components of our intervention. And then so the currently we have finished interviewing 32 adolescent and young adult brain tumor survivors and providers. So this included 16 young adult survivors and then 16 providers in our focus groups. And then we're converting the intervention materials from the PDF format to the print or the print version to be delivered through an app. It's powered by the Pathverse. And for those that you don't know about Pathverse, please go and check it out, because this is a free resource for researchers, and you do not need to know how to code to develop an app. And this was really helpful for us because we were able to have the participants test out the app and look at the app and how it's basically engaging in the app and give us feedback in terms of how they like the app usage and versus or PDF and print version. So we were able to get richer feedback from our participants. So together, these projects yield important insights into how to motivate our patients to adopt physical activity and behavior, and how to improve access to physical activity interventions and cancer rehabilitation interventions through virtual delivery of interventions to address under treatment issue, and then also how to promote systematic conduct of the physical function assessments to address the under detection issues in the future. So we have a lot more work to do, but we are definitely getting on our way in addressing those under treatment issues and then also under detection issues. And lastly, I do want to acknowledge all the funding sources and then also a village of participants, mentors, graduate students, and also research coordinators. And thank you for your time. And this is my contact information. We're ready for Q&A. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Swartz. That was a great presentation. We'll go ahead and take some time for questions now, as you mentioned. So as a reminder to the attendees, please type your questions into the chat box. So I'm going to start us out with some questions because I have a lot of them. This is it was really exciting to see your initial Pink Warrior study results and then how you adapted it to the more virtual platform, and now again how you're adapting it to childhood survivors of childhood and adolescent cancers. So but I'm intrigued by the game component, which I think which is really a central feature of all of these interventions. And as I understand it, you're in the Pink Warrior projects, you used a synchronous game, right? A group-based game where they played all together at the same time.
Yes.
So I'm
Correct.
wondering if you could kind of comment on the sort of pluses and minuses of having a kind of synchronous game as opposed to something that's more asynchronous where people, play on their own. I think about Words with Friends as an analogy. I can't think of a physical activity analogy, but what do you think are sort of the pluses and minuses of the synchronous versus the asynchronous approaches?
Yeah, so I would say from our observation and also feedback from our participants, they really enjoy the synchronous component, just because they are, so for example, for our in-person session, we use the Xbox game or the Connect game a lot because the patients were able to do the synchronous activities together in a round robin style. So each person gets to be a leader in front of the Connect camera, and or even the Connect camera sometimes zoom in on different participants for some reason, which we totally joke about it because we're like, well, Connect chose you today, so you get to be the leader. So there were no shy person in the room, or they cannot shy away from being the leader for some reason. So it was really serendipitous. So that the patients would get to, be there and be the lead or like follow along. And they actually watch each other and how they're doing the activities. And I think, that is where the group dynamic comes in, that they were able to see how each other are adapting and then also are playing the games. And then as far as the asynchronous component, I think, for them, the synchronous probably helped in terms of using the asynchronous video that we sent them, right? So the YouTube videos of the similar games that we were playing, we do send them those links for them to use during the week, because neither studies have enough funding for them to have game consoles at home. So they were much more confident, I think. And then also, and I didn't present our psychosocial results, but they did feel the competence did increase, and then also the relatedness, and then also social support did all increase in terms of our effect size. And then so I think overall, by using the synchronous first and then giving them the asynchronous type of videos, it helped to translate that skills that they learned in the synchronous setting into the asynchronous setting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it certainly the comments that you shared that participants made really did reflect on the social support aspects of the group and how important that was. And so I can see that. Do you think there are ways, just thinking about using games in general to increase physical activity, do you think there are ways to have a more asynchronous game that could also help increase social support, where are there ways to kind of recreate that in an asynchronous game? Because you think about like one big disadvantage of a synchronous game is that everybody has to be available at the same time, right? And in the case of your first study, they actually had to be in the same location at the same time. So are there ways that kind of the social support features can be built into more asynchronous games?
I think the social support features, I would say it's within the first studies with Dr. Lyons, and I will have to point to Dr. Lyons' studies. One of them is using the Jabo, where they have really good interactive app where the participants were able to see each other's activity and they were able to show, basically do reactions and comments. We were trying the same thing as in our Pink Warrior 2 using the Fitbit app. That did not get as much traction, and they didn't. It just didn't feel the same as our Java app, where there were a lot more interaction. But from what I heard in Dr. Lyon's study is using the face group with guided kind of engagement topics, they were a lot more like our Jawbone's finding, where they were a lot more engaged and then also able to provide that support. And that is more asynchronous type of support rather than synchronous.
Great, interesting. So I think that you said the second Pink Warrior was older breast cancer survivors specifically. That's a population that we tend to think is going to have difficulties with technology. It's partly, our preconceived notions of older people, but I think some of the older individuals do have more barriers. Similarly, your new AYA population are people who've had brain cancer, brain tumors, who may also have some cognitive difficulties and may also have challenges dealing with the technology. Can you talk about how you support those groups in, or any survivor, I guess, in adopting technology in this context so that they can be comfortable with it and it can be helpful to them as opposed to frustrating?
Sure, yes, I agree. So we did do a lot of run-in time during our initial visit. So our initial visit was set, and we did talk to them about that, where our initial visit is much longer. So we showed them exactly how to sync and resync Fitbit, because sometimes Fitbit doesn't quite sync right. Same thing with Xiaomi Band. And then we do go through the process with them, and then also sort of help them highlight differences in different parts of the user manual to do the troubleshooting. But having someone dedicated for troubleshooting constantly is definitely needed for these types of studies to help the survivors to not feel, or like any patients, to not feel frustrated in terms of using the technology. And as far as Zoom goes and the use of the teleconference platform, I think, as the silver lining of the pandemic is that, Zoom is kind of widely used now by a lot of people. But I would have to say, this is where I don't have any shares in Secure Video, but this is where Secure Video really helped our engagement, is that they sent out not just email links, but they also send out text links. And then so within the text message, they can just basically press that link and then they already joined the meeting. And they don't have to worry about anything else. And then so same thing for the email link, they can just press one link and then that's all they have to do. And then it's being alerted to them, right? So they were sent an alert an hour before the meeting time and 15 minutes before the meeting time. And we didn't have that much of a problem, other than maybe sometimes the connection issue happened, but then we were able to resolve that pretty quickly with someone on our end to kind of help them and step through. And I would say that definitely we needed two people to run the group, because one person can focus on the group to facilitate, and the other person is kind of like the troubleshooter on the side for those that cannot join right on time.
Yeah, interesting. So I appreciated seeing the Adaptome framework that you're using to adapt the Pink Warrior intervention to the AYA survivors of brain tumors. Can you say a little bit more about what you learned in those interviews, about what they liked and didn't like, what kind of changes they wanted to see?
Sure. So this is all preliminary because we're still diving into the data right now. They definitely want an app. They did not want any emails or any, because of our original thought was, well, we'll split the lesson by, by week and send you an email, or, instead of just like one binder of all the lessons together. They didn't like either the print material or the PDF materials to be sent in, in print or in PDF format on the email. So that's why we're really heading into developing an app-based type of delivery. And then the other one is the type of information they want to receive. They are definitely looking for that survivorship discussion topics, because they felt that was really important beyond just physical activity, because then they can connect between physical activity and their survivorship topic discussion. And then the feedback was also the ordering of the physical of the survivorship topic. So they wanted more symptom management type of information first, and then they go into more sensitive topics like intimacy, financial, toxicity type of discussions. And the other thing was definitely, because the population we're going to be focusing on is in the adolescent and young adult with brain tumors, is that the physical activity games that we may be choosing definitely need to have adaptation. And this is where the strength of synchronous comes in, because the facilitators are able to, basically help the patients adapt right on the spot rather than be frustrated, right? So there were some games where they do have to have certain type of movements in order to make the person go in the game. And then so we ourselves are actually playing the game with different type of adaptations. Like, for example, having some sort of arm wrap instead of holding on, where they may have neuropathy that they are not able to hold on to their controllers. And so like having some sort of wrap that can actually help them hold on to the controller is important. And then also the type of games that we're choosing need to match their ability, or like how to adjust in order to match their ability.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Those are important. I would say those are the top 3 that I can think of that kind of popped up between our provider feedback and also our adolescent and young adult.
Yeah, it really shows the value of carefully assessing and querying the population that you're adapting for, certainly, because the very different needs, I think, in that group. Well, yes. I think we're reaching the end of our time. So Dr. Swartz, thank you so much for offering this seminar today. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We appreciate that you attended, and remember the webinar will be archived on our website at mbscenter.org. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.